Welcome to Special Topics in Media. I'm Dr. Garrett Castleberry, a professor of communication at Mid-America Christian University. And in this episode, we have a special one-off, a summer treat for students enrolling in our graduate course, Media Methods and Content Creation. Media Methods and Content Creation is part of our graduate emphasis that students are able to partake in for either the MBA program in the School of Business, that Master's of Business Administration. It's very popular at the university, or the ML, our most accelerated master's program in leadership. And so we're excited to be able to develop and offer courses that can speak to the world of communication studies, its relationship to the fields of media production, media studies, and so on, but also have a foothold and a partnership to those worlds of leadership and business administration, and hopefully others to come. Well, as part of the Media Methods and Content Creation course, we are charging our students with developing their own original program and project along the way. There's different steps and tasks to complete, but we really want to create an individual experience for students where they can take it in the direction that suits their not just personal or even professional interests, but their passion. And to do that, we were hoping we would have an opportunity to link up with some other professionals that work in similar fields, that have crafted different types of technological projects that they use in different ways. And so I'm excited to bring in a guest in this special episode, interview them. This individual has forged a career in a couple of different areas, but most recently and most often, he's solidified status in higher education, worked in a number of positions in both faculty types of ranks, but transition that into administration. And while administration may not sound like the most exciting words, he's served as a dean in several capacities, and that's a fun term. That sounds like a great role, but we will hear about some other ways that he's making great use of his time as we welcome in Dr. Jay Hall. Jay Hall, welcome to Special Topics. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great, Garrett, and I'm excited to be here.
I know we still tripping on the formalisms of all your roles, all the hats you wear, that kind of thing. No, but we're mostly excited, and the reason I asked you, invited you to kind of join us in the conversation here is you've helped launch a program that you have devised, and it's linked to personal interest. It's the Okie Bookcast podcast. And before I have you describe and kind of explain elements of that podcast experience, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and maybe some of the places you've worked or what you're involved in.
Sure. Well, I'm an Oklahoma guy. I've been here most of my life. I did a 10-year stint in Texas for college and seminary and some other things, but got back as quickly as I possibly could. So Don't hold any of that against me. I am an educator, probably first and foremost. My career in ministry and then in higher education has always been about teaching. And so that is something I'm passionate about, something I'm always trying to get better at. Love now teaching in the higher ed classroom, but also in forums like this, where I get to just talk about things that I'm passionate and excited about and help expose other people to stuff that I'm learning as we go. I'm a dad, I'm a grandpa. I got to be sure I slip that in.
Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you very much. Just happened a couple months ago. I have 4 kids, all in college or beyond now. So the nest is rapidly emptying. But yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the Dean of Social Sciences at Oklahoma City Community College. Been there about 6 months, transferred there from OU, and basically oversee everything that there is to oversee in our social sciences division. Lots of different programs in psychology and history and sociology and things like that. So I get to teach a little bit, but I also get to be a teacher of teachers, which is a really fun thing that I didn't know would be a fun thing, but to get to help our faculty do what they do even better than they already do it. So it's that is a great spot to be in because it doesn't require the day-to-day being in the classroom, which is sometimes hard when you're in administration, but it does allow me to constantly be in this mode of helping people learn and get better, which is something that's who I am.
You are a man of wears many hats. It sounds like you've stayed quite busy over the years, family responsibilities, and now even or entering into a quote unquote empty nester status. Although I don't know if that term holds the same weight or water that it once did.
It doesn't mean what it used to. I can tell you that from experience.
But you still find time for personal interests and passions. What are some of the personal interests that you enjoy in life?
So a couple of things. One is the podcast, the Okie Bookcast, that consumes a considerable amount of time. And I know we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And, has become a confluence of lots of different things I'm passionate about, not just learning, but also reading and literacy and honestly, promoting Oklahoma. Not something that happens a lot in a lot of different channels, but there's a really cool literary community in a place where most people don't think about, things being literary first and foremost. And so getting to meet and interact and be a part of that community, because one of the things that's true of the podcast life is that it's not just me with a microphone talking about stuff. It really has opened doors for me to be involved in the larger writing and literary community of the state, which is super fun. I have met people that I would never have had a chance to meet otherwise, and gotten to hang out and gotten to have some experiences and go some places and interact in some things that people who know me well are a little bit amused by the fact that I'm, showing up at poetry open mics late on a Wednesday night. But it happens and it's all really fun stuff. In addition to the podcast, I'm an author. I've written a book about parenting, about being a dad, that came out earlier this year, and I'm working on one for college students that hopefully will be out in the next couple of months.
Nice.
Yeah. And, massive pop culture nerd. We could talk about that kind of stuff forever if we needed to. Love to read, lots of things, but between family and the podcast and writing, that's most of the time I have.
Well, you make an interesting through line through those comments. I mean, between the bookcast that we'll define shortly, and I'm excited for listeners and viewers to hear about that. And you mentioned an author, and I hope we get a chance to hear more about some of the work you've been up to. You closed with that sharing that interest in reading, that passion for that. Where does that date back to? And give us a kind of personal ranking of your, maybe your, I don't know what kind of accelerated reader points you built up over the years or what, but are you a casual reader? Are you an avid reader? Tell us a little bit more about your interest in reading.
I don't know what my AR points would be, but they would be significant. I have read, so my mom she's retired now, school teacher. I have a grandfather and a great uncle who every time I saw them, they had a book or two stacked next to them. My great uncle, literally the back of his car was just a sea of random books that he picked up places.
Oh, wow.
Literally just threw in his back seat to read at some point. The apocryphal story is that I started reading about 3, and the way they knew that I had started reading is I was in this may or may not be appropriate. I was in a restroom with my grandfather and started reading the walls and all that entailed. Sure. So they knew.
Taking in many words, phrases, and pictures in the stalls myself.
No idea what it meant, but I was sounding things out that I probably shouldn't have been. But I've always been, a lot of people talk about having that reading lull when they're in high school and college, and I didn't have that. I have been a pretty voracious reader since I could start. It's hard to gauge, how many books, that kind of thing, but I probably read an hour or 2 a day in the midst of everything else that goes on. And mostly fiction, because that's really I love to escape into different kinds of worlds and to think about things like that. Um, but yeah, it has always been a part of who I am, and so part of the joy of the Bookcast is it gives me an excuse to read because I've got to research. I've got to be sure I'm keeping up with things before we record.
Well, and for students that are studying leadership, and I'm sure other students have been exposed to this before. One of the things we often talk about is how we expend our energy, and then how we recharge our energy. So, are you suggesting for you as a hobby, is reading a way for you to recharge despite whatever happenings are going on in the day?
Oh, absolutely. I most days I try to be like my grandfather, my great uncle. I've always got a book with me, and
Hmm.
most days my lunch is closing the door of my office for about 30 minutes and sitting down with lunch and reading, emails off, phones off,
Sure.
just spending that time to kind of reset. And again, I think that's part of why fiction is such a big part of my reading, because I don't have to do anything with it. I can just
Yeah.
enjoy it. I don't have to apply it. I don't have to decide, oh, is this a list I need to be writing down so that I can work on it later? I can just read stories and enjoy them for what they are and then pick up and move on.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned fiction as a reading preference, because if I'm understanding it correctly, and I've sampled the program, we'll say at least a few times, the Okie Bookcast is a nonfiction program. Tell us a little bit about the Okie Bookcast, what it is, where these ideas came from, and then maybe we can get into some of the details of how
Sure.
how you assembled this project.
The Okie Bookcast at its core is a program designed to connect curious readers with their next great read. That's the tagline. That's the thing that I'm about. And the way that I've chosen to do that is by introducing people to these Oklahoma authors that I'm talking about, or Oklahoma storytellers, bookish
Mhm.
folks. We talk to librarians, we talk to booksellers and other folks. But at the heart of it, it really is exposing people to lots of great books. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One is just interviews. So twice a month, I drop
Mhm.
interviews with authors, like I mentioned, booksellers, librarians, publishers, bookstagrammers, just kind of whoever is part of that world connected to Oklahoma somehow. Um, and we talk about their work, but we also talk about their process and just stuff about them that is interesting. I've talked to a guy that does ghost tours around Oklahoma City, and I've talked to a Bigfoot hunter who also happens to write books about paranormal stuff. So it's not just about the book itself. There's a lot of process, a lot of just, we get into lots of different conversations. And then the other piece of exposing people to great books, my daughter, Hannah, who I think has been on talking about a movie here at some point.
I do believe so.
My daughter Hannah's an author, and she and I get together once a month and just talk about, usually bring a guest on, talk about what we're reading. That doesn't have to be connected to Oklahoma, just books that we're into. We give kind of short reviews, mostly mess with each other about the things that we read,
Mhm.
and then just recommendations for who we think these books might be good for. So if I'm reading kind of deep science fiction, then we talk about, if you're not into space opera, then you're not going to be into this. But
Mhm.
we also talk about a lot of books that are good entry points into genre. And so that's one of the fun things. We had an experience a couple of weeks ago where she and I were at a book signing, and somebody came up to us who had heard us talk about Frankenstein on the show and never in a million years would have considered reading it. But after we were kind of talking about what it was about, they picked it up, read it, and were talking about how much they loved it, and they didn't expect to. So it's cool to know that we are actually connecting with readers and exposing them to books that they might not otherwise have ever heard of or thought about.
A lot of people probably imagine, if you ask them to think about a library or a bookstore, they picture a very quiet place, right? Shh,
Right.
you can't talk. You shouldn't. You don't get too loud. Don't share. How do you take a love of books and then translate that into a vehicle where we say we want to create more of a dialogue about this, create more, generate more word of mouth.
It's funny. Most of the bookish people that I've interacted with tend to be introverted
Hmm.
until you start talking about books,
Yeah.
and they are off and running. And It's funny, even like we mentioned at this book signing, people would come up to us kind of shyly, and then we would start asking questions about, what do you like to read, or what are you into? And then it was complete animation, 100 miles an hour, and having a hard time ending the conversation. And I think that's it. It's creating a space where it's okay to talk about this stuff, right? If you've ever been to a book club, you see everybody kind of, especially in the early days of a book club where people don't really know each other well yet, everybody shows up and they're kind of careful and a little bit quiet. And then everybody opens their books and it's off to the races. And everybody's talking and has opinions and has ideas. And so I think a lot of it is just creating that space. And that's part of what the Bookcast is about. We have a conversation on the show, but then through social media, through other interactions, we try to continue to engage people in just dialogue about, what are you reading and why are you into it, or why aren't you into it, and building this community of people who are getting recommendations from each other, who are bouncing ideas off of each other, who are reading things they would never have read before, who are telling us how wrong we are about things that we liked. But most of the time it's telling us that we were spot on.
Well, one of the things to kind of draw a parallel that we focused on in our communication program with students at MacU is we want to help them shift from the traditional passive mode of leisurely consumption of media or other materials into an active mode of not only critical reasoning, but in this instance, the name of the course, content creation. We're trying to help build up and encourage content creators, but not just to create more content. There's certainly no shortage of content. We want to be thoughtful. We're trying to look at that, like where the ethical decision making practices, and so it sounds like what you're able to locate through the Okie Bookcast is a service, right? There's a little bit of community service in what you're able to provide.
Absolutely. And I don't know that that was all that intentional from the jump, but
Mhm.
I think it's something that, especially as we expanded the sphere beyond just, not just, but quote unquote, just authors, and
Sure.
started talking to librarians and started talking to, we talked to the executive director of the Oklahoma Center for the Book, and she got to talk about what they do. And most people have no idea that there is an Oklahoma Center for the Book, but it's a
Right.
state agency. And we've talked to librarians and the folks who oversee the Sequoia Awards and the Oklahoma Book
Mhm.
Awards, and all these different things that just, again, are bringing awareness to the great stuff that's going on here and to the books that are a part of it. So yeah, I feel now, gosh, pushing on 2 years in, more responsibility to be aware of what's going on and to make sure that I'm amplifying as much of that as I can. Because the last thing I want is for somebody to feel left out. You
Mhm.
talked about this guy's thing and this guy's thing and her thing, but you didn't talk about my thing, which there's a little bit of weight to that because it's hard to know everything that's going on, but it's also a ton of fun because a lot of stuff just comes to me that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. I had somebody reach out a couple of days ago. Apparently there's something called I will never say this right. Romancelahoma. That is a writers conference for romance writers from
Okay.
Oklahoma that's going on in Tulsa, I think, maybe going to Oklahoma City. Just asking if I'd be interested in contributing some swag for their gift bags.
Mhm.
So again, I had no idea this was a thing, but I'm excited, not necessarily to attend because that's not my thing, but excited to be able to contribute and be a part and help promote what's going on there.
Romance Lahoma. I'm gonna have to see if this thing is twittering on whatever social media platforms are existing at the point in time
Social
when
media of
this
the day.
shindig is going down. What well, our students in this course, they're coming at studying media, and not just studying media and some methods or methodologies associated with communication and media, but they're being tasked with creating some media and a reason. There's a few reasons, but a primary reason it was incredibly valuable to see if we could have you on to talk about what you do. Is you've been able to successfully bridge personal interest into a communication platform, and by doing that, and I can't interpret here, but I sense it was less laborious than perhaps if you had been doing it for, I don't know, the thing you like least in life, right? Like eating carrots or something like that.
That's a
Can you
podcast no one would listen to.
Yeah, can you walk us through, maybe for those that are the least experienced or hesitant, how do you overcome some of those initial stages of hesitancy to eventually step out on the platform, kind of allow your voice to go public?
About 2 years ago, I was trying to figure out what to do with a lot of free time that I suddenly had that I hadn't had literally in 20 something years because of all these children I talked about.
Yeah.
And um, I had listened to some podcasts, the ones that everybody was kind of, Serial and S Town and some of the others that were kind of the
Sure,
thing.
sure.
Um, and I sat down one night and said, what am I interested in? And it was reading and learning and technology and things like that. And just kind of made this list and thought, okay, how does all this come together? And literally, not to make this overly mystical, but woke up the next morning with the idea for a podcast in my head, which is something I never thought about before. I'd listened to them, but there was never this, "Oh, I bet I could do that," or even that I wanted to. And I think you and I actually talked not long after that kind of initial epiphany. Um, I spent the next 6 weeks trying to talk myself out of it
Huh.
by just trying to figure out what was involved, what's the
Mhm,
technology, what's the
mhm.
learning curve, what kind of time are we talking about, what are the possibilities? And the more I tried to talk myself out of it and the more I learned about it, the more doable it became in my head and the less I was able to say, yeah, I'm not going to do this. So I think to get to the question you asked, some of what kind of generated that belief that I could was seeing that it really isn't as complicated as I thought it might be. And having an idea that I couldn't shake. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say
Yeah.
when I woke up on that early Saturday morning with the idea for the Okie Bookcast, what exists today, 2 years later, is almost exactly what was in my head that morning, for better or worse, but that's what it is. So I think having an idea that, you've mentioned passion several times, that I was passionate enough about to continue to
Mhm.
pursue, and then recognizing, the beauty of podcasting is the entry point is super low. You can literally do it with a computer. You can do it with your phone. There are people who are doing that.
Yeah.
And there's upside and downside to some of that, but it's not hard to get into. And if you have, and it's early enough in the history of the medium that there's still space for everybody.
Yeah.
I think the conversation now is that there's 4 million and change podcasts that are listed on Spotify, but of those, only about 150 are active, meaning
Hmm.
that they had something, or 150,000, sorry, not just 150, that'd be
Oh,
something.
man.
Yeah, jump in. 150,000 that have posted in the last 30 or 60 days. I don't remember exactly what the stat is.
Mhm.
So there's lots of folks who've jumped in and given it a shot. And I
Sure.
think some of what they call pod fade, because we have to call everything something. But this idea of jumping in, getting started, and then walking away is one, not having something that you're passionate enough about to keep going. And I think the second thing is going in with kind of unrealistic expectations about who's going to listen.
Yeah.
Lots of folks jump in thinking, man, what I have to say is so brilliant or so funny or so amazing that,
Surely no one's thought of this before.
well, and thousands of people will flock to hear my voice. And what lots of people find out is that ones of people will flock to hear your voice, and most of them are related to you. And you've got to do some work to get the word out beyond that. So, we see people that seem to be quote unquote overnight successes, that they jump out and everybody's listening and
Mhm.
50,000 downloads a month and that kind of thing. There's usually a machine behind that. It's not just one person in their closet like I am right now, cranking something out and everybody jumps on board.
Well, I would echo that to say, yeah, I was quickly learned not even my mom's listening. So if that there is a true uphill battle, but you know what? There's also some freedom in that.
Absolutely.
More importantly, and I appreciate the door you've opened here for students when thinking about this, is that there is room to experiment.
Yeah.
And a long time ago, I would say, I tell this story sometimes. Over time, I don't know how much becomes folklore. Like, what am I manipulating? How much of it was original? But I recall telling my boss when I first started as a program director in this job. that I needed room, I needed space to experiment. And that meant the ability to even to fail, to learn from it, to be able to test things out and to see what's going to work. What, because if we're seeking innovation, if we're seeking to make meaning, as we often talk about in communication, and have meaning that matters, we want to have that space, and that should be a breath of fresh air for perhaps
Absolutely.
students looking to with lacking experience, lacking confidence, but looking to kind of experiment with their ideas in this format. Well, let me ask this. It's a little bit of a pop fly question, but what was your process like discovering your own cover art? Do you have any kind of methods or tricks or sites that you could recommend to students? Because I think that's an under discussed area that we've actually built into this course, and we
Yeah.
encourage our students at one point later in the class to develop their own like digital flyer or cover art potentially.
So let me back up and just say something real quick about what you're talking about with experimentation. One of the things that, we have this idea of the internet is forever, and there are lots of ways in which that is true, but podcasting isn't necessarily, right?
Mm,
You can fire something out and then
mhm.
make it go away.
Yeah.
And, unless somebody saved it somewhere, which most people don't do, it's just gone. And so, there's great freedom in I'm going to try this thing and see if it works. And if it absolutely flops, then you just pull it, which
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
again incredible freedom. But I think
Mhm.
one of the things that I think about in the this idea that we're fairly young in the process of podcasting is that most podcasts are one of about three things. It's interviews, or it's one person at a mic, or a couple of guys at a mic talking, or we're really getting into more audio fiction, which is really kind of an
Yeah.
interesting space. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more that can be done with some of this than we're doing yet. There's things we're playing with. um for example, real quick, one of the things that we do, as I thought about the proliferation of Oklahoma writing, was trying to figure out what to do with poets,
Yeah, sure.
because an 45-minute conversation with a poet could be fascinating, but it might also get to be complicated for people listening just the conversation.
Mhm.
And so this time last year, we launched an audio poetry anthology that once a quarter we collect 10 or 12 poems that are read by the writer, by the poet, and then just produce those and send it out. And it's one of the most popular things we do. People love listening to that, who again wouldn't necessarily think much about poetry, but because it's low stakes, you can get in and listen to a poem or two and then get out if you're not into it. We have tons of people that listen to it's called Behind the Rain, tons of people that listen to that show. That's not what you asked me. um Thinking about art, when I did my cover art, I actually went out and had it professionally done because I knew it was going to be something that would stay with me for
Yeah.
the life of the podcast, and I also
Mhm.
knew my limits as a graphic designer. So, and honestly, went to Fiverr, found a guy who would do a logo for like $70, and it was money well spent.
Mhm.
Had some clear ideas about what I wanted. I wanted to include the colors of the Oklahoma State flag, and primarily the blue that's part of our flag. I wanted an outline of the state on it because that just made sense, and then everything else he just kind of put together and did a fantastic. It's simple, it's clean, but it's also memorable. Like when you see it, that's me and that's our show. Everything I've done since. So every episode that comes out, we put together a it's not cover art because it doesn't go out with the podcast, but promotional art. So we include images of the guest, images of their book, things like that. All of that's done via Canva, Canva. And
Yes.
Canva is the not good graphic designer's best friend because they template everything.
Yeah.
And up to a certain point, it's free. So you can get in Canva and do whatever you need to do. And honestly, the free version does almost everything you could want. Now, there's some templates and some other things that aren't available to you for free, but I found very few limitations that I thought, oh man, I wish I went ahead and spent the $12 a month so that I could do whatever else. But Canva is my best friend. And one of the great things about it, and this is not meant to be an ad for Canva, no paid promotional consideration here.
Yet.
you can create a template of your brand identity and then just plug your stuff in. So that's what I have. I have an Instagram image that is the same for every episode. All I do is just pull out the picture of one guest and put in a picture of another one and use that same image over and over again to create that brand identity, right? This is what, when you're scrolling through your feed, you see that, you know, it's the Okie Bookcast. We've done something new, but it's also super simple and pretty quick to accomplish.
Well, that is wonderful. And as a bit of just a bit of background trivia and just kind of sharing the love, because you've been really generous with your time and some of your stories and experiences with us. Jay did locate a pocket universe of time to serve as, I guess, on one hand, you could call it consultant. On the other hand, we sometimes reference it as a subject matter expert. He has helped a small team of us craft an identity for some of these machinations in the course, and so we're really grateful, and it's worthy to be able to spotlight that and demonstrate the dexterity of how that service continues to kind of give back to this form, and the brilliance that you can come at it from any direction.
Yeah.
It could be personal, private, corporate, and so on, and locate something. Well, any parting words of encouragement or wisdom, fair warnings to students looking to venture into this hobby?
I think the thing that I try to tell people who are getting into it is decide what your thing is and then go for that and don't worry about what anybody tells you. You know, if I had gone to people at the beginning of this and said, I want to do a podcast where I spotlight Oklahoma authors, I would have heard a lot of nobody's going to listen to that. And in fact, I've had conversations with folks since that, you know, if you expand it beyond Oklahoma, you get a lot more people to listen. And that's probably true, but it's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get caught up in, we were joking about numbers before. I think we get caught up in this idea of it's not a success if it doesn't hit whatever threshold. And I don't think that's true. Now, if it's your business, you probably want to do that. But when we're talking about hobby things like this, if the goal is for you to do something you're passionate about and just put it out there, then don't let anybody else decide what that is for you. You know, find the thing that you're excited about and chase it. And if it turns into business, man, that's awesome. It probably won't. For most of us, it doesn't. But the joy of production and putting this thing together and getting to meet people that share your passion and be a part of that is worth the time you're spending. You're going to be doing something with your spare time. It might as well be something that you're excited about.
Jay Hall, thank you so much for these words of wisdom. What a wonderful chance to hear from you, learn more about this program you've created, and you're able to caretake for. It's exciting. Folks should check out the Okie Bookcast. Feel free to shoot an email, a private message. I'm not sure how can folks locate this, or maybe even send inquiries of interest.
Sure. Okiebookcast.com is kind of the hub of everything. But I'm also on all the relevant social media. I don't even know what those are anymore, at Okie Bookcast. So right now it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's Threads that just went live last night and has turned into like the weirdest, party in the high school gym that's ever existed. But it's at Okie Bookcast at all those places, or just okiebookcast@gmail.com. And I'm more than happy to talk to podcasters, folks who are trying to get into it. One of the great things about this indie community is there are tons of people who are willing to help, and lots of folks help me get to where I am. And so I'm more than happy to pay that forward, especially with students, because I just think it's such an exciting time to figure things out. So yeah, if you search Okie Bookcast just about anywhere, you're going to find me.
And hopefully it's the Threads gym is not one with the floor that opens in the middle to like dump everyone into the pool underneath.
Not yet.
Oh, it's been great talking to you, Jay. I appreciate it. Best of luck as you continue to service the state of Oklahoma and your listenership with this product. And thanks for taking time out of your schedule. And for our listeners, thank you all for sitting in on these one-offs. This is definitely a long-term goal we've had on the program, and we're so excited to continue to expand the avenues to kind of practice that spreadability that we sometimes talk about in our classes or read about in our textbooks, things like that. But all the avenues and in between that we will explore on special topics in media.